Brilliant. Thanks, Chantel. And hello, everybody. I'm really sorry I can't actually get to see you live, but I'm really pleased to be hosting this panel today on a hugely important topic. So we are talking today really about the topic of has gender diversity in the workplace fallen by the wayside in the kind of ever increasing conversation about how we're tackling diversity in general, and of course because of the pandemic and the impact that that may have. I'm joined today by three amazing panelists, and I'm going to get them to introduce themselves shortly. But before I do start, I just thought I'd give a bit of background about myself. So I am the Chief People Officer at Harvey Nash Group, and I have the great role of actually delivering upon our people strategy through our business and with our teams, supporting both the technology business and technology recruiting businesses. So it's a topic, gender diversity is one of our key topics, and it's one of the things that we have been focusing quite heavily on. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to my panelists and let them introduce themselves. So if we could start with Chris. Chris, if you'd like to just give a quick introduction.
Yeah, hey everyone. So I'm Chris Meah. I've started the School of Code a good few years ago now, and the aim was to try and get more and different types of people into tech. My background's AI and computer science, so I started with a bachelor's and a master's and a PhD, and then started the School of Code while I was finishing because there's a massive cliff edge of automation coming for most people's jobs, which I cannot look past. And for me, we need to make sure that people don't get left behind, but also have a route into some of the most fulfilling and prosperous jobs and careers that you can get. So trying to bring the opportunity of tech to everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And let's move on to Steph. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, such a pleasure to be here today. My name is Stephanie Melodia and I'm the founder of a marketing agency called Bloom. I was also voted the UK's in the UK's top 20 most influential female founders by Startups magazine, which was a big honour. Huge advocate for gender equality, which is why I'm here today. I host annual International Women's Day events, and I'm very much an advocate for he for she and making sure that men are not only feeling welcome, but encouraged in the conversation for gender equality.
Brilliant, thanks, Stephanie. And finally, Simon.
Good afternoon, it's great to see you all. So I'm Simon Hopkins. I'm afraid to say I'm a 35-year veteran of the creative industries and technology, which is horrific as I say those words, but I wear many hats, but the reason I'm here today is that the primary hat I wear is I'm the co-founder of Angel Academe, which is a network of mostly, but not entirely, and we'll come on to this, female high net worth angel investors. And our shtick is that we're trying to unlock more capital from women investors to get that capital to early stage female founded or co-founded startups, broadly in the tech space.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. So really great introductions, and it gives our listeners a chance just to get a bit more understanding about yourself. Stephanie, I was really interested in what you just said there in you being a he for she advocate, and it's an interesting point, actually. There's a lot of discussion about women's networks and the fact that they are considered often not to feel inclusive. And I think if we're truly to change and level up in the space of gender diversity, men have a hugely important role to play in that. And so I'm not going to start with you, Stephanie, on that question. I'm actually going to start with one of my male panelists. I'm absolutely delighted that actually we have a good representation. So Simon, can I start with you? Can you tell me about the role that you think men should play in gender diversity?
Well, yes, I mean, I don't think it's for me to say what role men should play. That's for men and their friends, their female allies to decide. But look, I'll start with the fact that my co-founder Sarah always jokes that our diversity target at Angel Academy is actually 35% men. So, because we switched it around the other way, and you know what can I say? Clearly the men that are involved in our network do so, I think, for two reasons. Probably multiple reasons, but the two main ones. I think, firstly, I think they find that actually being in an environment which is principally a women's network actually brings a very, and we may get into this, but a very different dynamic. And I found, from my experience, actually a much more collegiate environment to work in as an investor. And I think there are a lot of men in the network. In fact, I'd say all the men in the network as investors are absolutely convinced that investing in women is not just the right thing to do for kind of ethical reasons or moral reasons, but actually just makes damn good business sense. I mean, the figures are really clear on the success of women-led or co-led businesses. So, I think the men, again, I wouldn't want to speak for all men, but certainly the kinds of men that are in our group, I think are there because, as investors, they just think it's a damn good place to be.
Great, thanks, Simon. Stephanie, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to running Bloom, because managing an agency doesn't keep me busy enough, apparently, I'm also a scout for Ada Ventures. So I definitely have some insights into that early stage VC world. And those comments there, Simon, definitely ring true in as much as female founders being that better bet. For me, I'm so passionate about getting men in part of the conversation and pushing to have, you guys on this panel with us as well, because what we saw was, I think in one of the previous talks there, we talked about the Me Too era, of course. I'm very much about this #MenToo. After that movement, we saw 60% of male managers actually feel uncomfortable at the prospect of managing younger women coming into the business, which personally for me just saddens me. My first mentors at the start of my career were men, and they were absolutely amazing. And I definitely wouldn't be here without them today. I've looked up to them. I think they're incredible. And so whilst there is absolutely a place in the world for these women's only networks, these private members clubs, these communities, which you touched on there before, Mel, it doesn't send out the right message of diversity and inclusion, because you're doing the opposite here. You're being exclusive. And so I think there's really interesting discussion here, coming back to your point, Simon, on women making a better bet, better investment, et cetera, et cetera. I think whenever there are inequalities, there is always a push to rebalance that and kind of push even further ahead, make sure that there are more female role models, more women in senior positions of leadership for that visibility. And that's where you start to getting those quotas. Of course, the risk is doing the right thing for the wrong reasons does have that risk of having that backlash. And I think at this point in time, we're 2021, we're 18 months into the pandemic, we've seen how actually there's been all this positivity in some of the previous talks as today's conference and how far we've come and how much better things are. But if you look at it over the past 12 to 18 months, we've actually regressed and feminism has slipped back in time. So we need to make sure that these problems are brought to the forefront, as we are with conversations like this today, and that we are readdressing that balance without making, the other gender or the other minorities or whoever feel as if they're not part of that conversation, because we do need each other to lift each other up.
Brilliant. I totally agree. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to add any thoughts to that.
Yeah, sure. So, really interesting from Simon and Stephanie. I think, the word inclusion. So for me, because these words can mean so many things to so many different people. So it's people learning to work, live and play together, because it's really hard to work with people that aren't like you. It's a really frustrating process. You just think, why can't you think like me? And the truth is, throughout education, you at school, you're all the same sort of age, you're from the same sort of background, your parents do the same sort of job, you're from the same area, so you never really have to pick up soft skills. University, same. So when you get to work, that's the first time you probably really have to interact with people that are completely different in terms of politics or generation or worldview or perspective or experiences. And I think one thing that I'm always really keen on is we get different types of people and more types of people working together, learning that really vital skill, because you have to learn how to share perspectives. Like if you can only work with people like you and you think you're right, well, there's no point in having conversations with anyone. Like you need to learn to share perspectives and be able to bring those to the table. And everyone in tech knows that, because to solve a complex problem, you can't just have 5 really intelligent people if they all think the same. Like you're missing a massive area of the problem space. You need people that can, you know, bring different perspectives, which is great. But if they don't know how to interact together, then it's just going to turn into like a bloodbath, or Twitter as it's known, where they're just like slanging insults and, you know, oh, you. So it really is about learning to work together. And I think that's why, you know, opening up these networks and really getting people working together from all different backgrounds, that's the key thing. And that's what we built a whole business on.
Thanks, Chris. I think you make a really good point, actually. And the topic of soft skills is actually something significantly broader, and something, you know, personally, I think we should be investing more in at school age as well, in giving people, you know, a broader development around soft skills. Stephanie, I just want to kind of pop back to what you were saying about the fact that the pandemic has had a regressive effect on gender equality. So what do you think organisations can do to respond to this?
So when women enter the workforce, it's largely equal in terms of pay and career prospects. And so when you see both genders leaving university and starting their careers, they're pretty much, you know, if you do it side by side, it's equal footing. It really is the motherhood penalty where it starts to kick in. So it's when women start reaching that childbearing age and start getting asked some funny questions in interviews, and reach that certain point in their life where things do start to go downhill. And really, it does all come back to that. It comes back to childcare, and there's no fighting or escaping biology. At the end of the day, women make life for 9 months, so the best part of the year, and there is that maternal instinct, there is that bond when of course the baby is born. That is life, that is the crux of it, and it is very much the pay gap simply compounds that effect, where if there's a decision to be made, as much as there is a shared parental leave, you've got the pay gap, and then you've got the whole masculine toxicity that comes into that as well. So even if you can take an equal share of leave, how are the rest of your workplace going to respond to that as a man, as the father? You know, in order for women to be strong, the men need to be weak as well, right? This is how we need to have like that balance with the two. And so you've got that kind of the childcare, the burden of that is ultimately the crux of it, which is why we've slipped back in time. The really important thing, you know, we touched on the hard and the soft skills. And I just want to build quickly on what you were saying there, Chris, where I was thinking actually just before this panel, so much of it in the professional environment with companies is bad management. And there are a lot of people who have ascended the ranks and become managers without the formal training or by exceeding in certain areas, whereas actually it's understanding how to leverage the various different natural strengths and hard and soft skills and everything of the team to make it work in the best possible way. And so the real important thing here is getting back to that point of how we've regressed is the whole soft and hard. It's not only the time that the woman has taken out, the maternity leave, the opportunities that she's missed out on once to have a family around, but it is the mental load of that as well. So in another interesting panel, it's also, you know, it's not just about who's taking care of these household matters, but who's thinking about them, who's putting together the shopping list, who's sorting out the cleaning or picking up little Johnny from the nursery. Fine, it's all very good and well if the dad is stepping up and helping out, and I'm obviously referring to heteronormative family units here, but did he need to be told to go and pick them up from nursery or sort out childcare? And is he following orders because the woman is still the one thinking about it? So that's really what it's gone back down to. And the fact that we've had to look at the homeschooling and, you know, teaching, you know, our kids from home as well as everything else, it just makes life impossible for women at this point.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think the topic of shared parental leave is an interesting one. I remember sitting on a panel, it must have been 2 or 3 years ago, and there was a guy speaking on the panel who worked a 4-day week, and he said it was really interesting having that discussion in his organisation in a senior role, saying I want to do a 4-day week because I want to take on childcare responsibilities for that, you know, the 5th day, and the response that he got from other people was quite telling. So I think, you know, there's definitely some work that organisations can do about how they start to promote more of these things. So Chris, let's go to you. Do you have any advice or anything that you think organisations could be doing to tackle this?
To tackle the effects of the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think what Stephanie was saying there is there's a lot to build on there, and there's always a lot of different points as well that come into it. It's just a multivariate problem, and it's always really hard to then isolate and say, well, which bit is people are always too quick to be like, well, it's that bit. There's so many different aspects, like Stephanie was just saying. I think for me, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of changes that were already coming, but it's also brought its own issues as well. So it's probably the first time in a long time that both parents have been at home for a sustained period, and it'll be interesting in 20 years' time if we get a load of really attention-seeking children, or that have just had loads of, never seen so much of their parents. Or I'm kidding, but probably not. To be fair, we'll see what the data says. But there's, what the effects of having both parents at home has been on children will be interesting, but also on that dynamic in the relationship as well, and probably open the eyes for some partners to see exactly what, how much childcare there is, or especially when schools were shut, crazy sort of things happening. But I think the bigger picture for me is it's sort of like an indicator of what automation will bring, and the impacts of that compared to the pandemic, I think just are massive. So, if you just take like one thing, like self-driving cars, if that comes in the next sort of 5, 10, 15 years, there's millions of jobs, millions of supply chains lost. Yes, there will be new jobs created, but it's going to be very hard to take somebody that's been like driving lorries for 20 years and say, okay, now we're going to drop you in and you're going to manage these AI systems, or you're going to create these systems. So I think massive national retraining schemes are needed to be able to have people lifelong learn, dip in and out when they need to. But even if you're in it full time, like, you're going to have to reskill every so often anyway. So I think it's really the adjustment of how people keep up with skills and are available to like dip in and out of careers and change careers and not feel like they have to reset all the time. So I think those are really key points.
Melanie, can I just cut in for a second?
Yeah.
Just because I just want to, I think so many great points in there, and I just want to respond to 3 of them, if that's all right. So I know you got all your questions lined up, so I'm going to try and be brief. But so I think, Chris's opening point about real diversity of thinking in teams is really, really key. And what I'm aware of when we get into discussions about diversity, and forgive me for going on a slight tangent here, but is I think one issue that is just not addressed clearly enough is the issue of class and education, which was touched on in the previous presentation. I say this basically as a cisgendered white straight man. I'm the loser in the intersectional Olympics, or the winner, whichever way around it goes. But actually, the one thing I say is that I'm from a provincial working class background. I've spent almost my entire career surrounded by middle class people with a certain set of assumptions about the world, and yet we're all making stuff, services, tools, products for a population which 60% of which considers itself working class in this country. So I'm just chucking that in there. I think that's a really important issue. And I think also, if you do think about social class, it starts to unlock certain issues around gender equality as well. And then I think, sort of building on that, to Stephanie's point about, it was Chris's point again about automation. I mean, I think a really important book that was published earlier this year is David Goodhart's book called, I think it's Head, Heart, Hand, which is about the future of professions and how we've really privileged what he calls head jobs, so intellectually driven jobs, over all the others, so manual labor, and crucially, and I think this plays to the issue around what he calls heart, the caring professions. And of course, we've seen that just exploded in the last 18 months around nursing and care home staff. And these are traditionally female areas. And I think one thing that, you know, the automation that Chris is talking about is going to actually see the rise in the importance of those roles which are traditionally have been very female and have frankly been sidelined. And I appreciate, look, we're having a conversation about tech, so it's slightly off topic, but I think it's really important to bear in mind. And my last thing, and I will shut up then, is just to get to Stephanie's point about the childcare agenda, and I think all those points are extremely well made. And if I'm just going to throw one more in there, which is many of the women in our network, because they are high net worths, you know, because they have to be angel investors, are at a certain point in their life, and most of them are not worried about childcare or getting or making packed lunches because their children are big and grown up. But something that we saw last year, I think, is which I've rarely seen discussed, is that suddenly all these mums that have got their kids packed off to university or out into the workplace, not so much. They're all back home last year. So we've got these high-powered, extremely busy women with multiple jobs and roles who think that they've got time suddenly in their life to do what they really want to do. And the kids are back and they still want feeding 3 times a day. So I think there's just so much that's happened in the last 18 months. And I'm sorry if that's a bit freeform, but I just wanted to respond to some of those points.
I think you make some really good points. I think there's one other thing, and the conversation around class is a really interesting one. But I think I want to make one other point. We talk a lot when we talk about gender around childcare, but actually the number of women who are choosing not to have children is significantly increasing, right? So if we have a larger proportion of women who are choosing not to have children, so you know, I sit in that camp, and I've sat on at panels and been to events where the entire conversation has been about you can be a woman and have children and have a career, and that, you know, doesn't apply to me. What sort of things might impact those women, you know, because it's not all childcare. And if we've got issues around gender diversity, is it to do with, and this is probably aimed more, actually no, this is an open question to everybody. If it's aimed more around how are we creating opportunities, how are we addressing, you know, we've heard today different conversations around not going for roles that are more senior because you feel that you're not ticking all of the boxes, right? So you're going through the list and you're like, oh, I think one of the earlier keynote speakers was saying 75%. So I think that number goes up and down. So what things can people do, leaders do, managers do, employers do to help to address those issues? Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was good. I'll jump in. Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things in there, but one thing that I'm surprised that hasn't really been brought up is the education system. Obviously, I'm really biased, as you can tell. I've got a bee in my bonnet, right? But 13% of computer science undergraduates are female, and we've never seen so much effort put into attracting girls and so many sort of schemes and all these ideas, and yet it's never quite moved forward. And I think that sort of highlights what the education system does, which it sort of takes advantage of people already being interested in this stuff. So when I got to university, I was going to do something like maths and business or English lit, and I actually chose AI because I've just watched iRobot with Will Smith, and I thought I sort of wanted to be Will Smith, and so I thought I'm doing that. And I turned up on the first day, and you know, almost everyone could already code. And the typical story in tech is my mum or dad bought me a ZX Spectrum when I was 6 years old. I was taking apart a computer, and so we're just used to like that being the only route. And there's, you know, if you have to be lucky enough for your parents to have introduced you to this stuff, then a lot of people are going to be stuck. And I think it's a real failure, and it shows the problems in the education system that all they do is seem to take that, let's call it low-hanging fruit, like people that are always going to, you know, head that way. And it's what about everyone else? What about, and why should you have to choose before 18? If your decisions before 18 dictate the rest of your life, then I think everybody's screwed up. I definitely am. So I'm glad that, you know, that's not the case, but we need a way that people can have careers or go down the wrong path or whatever, and realize that that job is not going to exist or it doesn't fulfill them, and switch over. So I think there's two things there. One is, you know, what's actually really underlying the problem, and at the junior level especially, which is where we help, you know, get people in, there's just not enough people, right? Like 13%, you're never going to move the dial. Like our course is a 50-50 at application level. So it's not like people aren't interested in this stuff. Traditionally, you know, men and women are more the same than different, but the differences across society in some of the studies I've seen are, you know, men tend to be more interested in things. So like, you know, mechanics, STEM fields, that sort of stuff. And as Simon was saying, women, on average, more interested in people. So like the caring professions and teaching and stuff like that. So obviously really broad generalizations there, but what it misses is that tech isn't the stereotype of being in a basement, like coding away, headphones on, you know, on your own, and you make a website. It's a people skill now. Like it's a team sport. Like you've got products that need to last 10 years and need thousands of people working on them, iterating on them constantly. You need to be solving people's problems. So every problem you're solving is a people problem. And there's so many different roles in the tech team that I just think we do a mis-selling of that sort of stereotypical role. Like actually, whatever you can think about you enjoy in real life, there is a way to do that in tech. Like whatever skill you've got, whatever role you enjoy. And we're just not sending that message out enough. But everyone knows tech's important. Everyone thinks Facebook's spying on them when they message someone in WhatsApp. And then they see an advert for it on Facebook, you know, about, I don't know, whatever. They know the power of data. They know tech is important and runs their lives, but they don't see a route in for them. So I think that's the big takeaway, really. We've got to get more people in.
If you don't mind me chiming in there, just quickly, sorry, jumping in, because Chris, I share your bee in the bonnet with the education system entirely. On the class thing, I surprise people by letting out that I am actually not university educated. My parents come from a working class background. My mum was born in Elephant and Castle. You can't really get too rougher than that, especially back in the 60s. But I think just building on that as well, this is why this is such deeper. I just want to firstly comment on, obviously going back to the main question anyway, Mel, just so I don't get sidetracked here, is just firstly pointing out the fact that you have a panel of 2 men and 1 woman who also is not a parent. So the responses to this is fundamentally, to Chris's point there, is it is the education that is wrong. It's such a deeper perception, kind of behavioral shift that needs to happen, which is why these things take time. We are in the right direction, but things have been slowed down because of the pandemic. So what can we do to propel that? Not only is it the education system, but it's what we see when we grow up. It's the toys that we're given as children. I was given Barbies and I love them. I still love them. I consider myself a very feminine woman, but I grew up in a very matriarchal household and with lots of amazing kind of strong female role models around me. So for me, it's actually kind of what I've been seeing around my wider kind of female networks and what they come up against, and really kind of amplifying those voices and being that kind of stronger and louder voice to come in onto a panel with 2 other guys. So because it's Steve, I think the other thing to mention here is obviously my day job, my profession is in marketing. And so I think you've got the education, you've got the products, you've got everything that you're exposed to, you've got your parents, all of these influences as you're growing up. But in marketing, in the media, in the way that brands are being sold, in the way that packages are colored up. I was in Selfridges the other day and they have this science kit for girls, and it has got a mini Bunsen burner and the kind of the test tubes and everything else, but they've got a picture of a girl on the front, and obviously they've got pink in the colors as well. So it's really challenging those stereotypes. And I think until we eradicate out the legacy issues, and as the new generations come in with more of that open-mindedness, we're already seeing Gen Z are looking at things in different ways. You've got the, you know, all these old remakes of television shows that are doing things in new and fun and interesting ways. But for the here and now, I think it just goes back to, I want to underline a phrase that I mentioned earlier, which is for women to be stronger, we need to allow the men to feel weaker. And so it's allowing women to step up into these positions, be these role models that they need to be. You need to see her to be her, all of that stuff around role model visibility. And the men, it just makes sense if the majority of the boardrooms are made up of, you know, cis, white, straight guys. Like, I can only lift up the other women as high as I can. As I mentioned before, I've had the most incredible male managers, mentors in the past. A lot of our clients at the company at the moment as well are men. We need you to be allies and lift us up. And it's also what you talk about and how you behave when the women aren't in the room as well to each other. So
thanks, Stephanie. Great points. We have 3 minutes left, so what I'd like to do is ask, and I know you've all got lots of amazing things to talk about, but I'd like you to give all of our viewers and listeners something that they can practically take away with them that might help them to make a difference or support change in their organizations, or even, you know, with their network. So Simon, should we start with you? And if we could all do this a minute each, that would be amazing.
I think I'm being told to hurry up there, aren't I? Yes, look, a really practical thing, and it depends really who we're speaking to. I realise there'll be all kinds of people listening in, but, you know, certainly for those people that are in large companies, large SMEs or corporates that are in a procurement or buying position, I would say just try to have something of a gender lens when you're buying products or services for your companies. I'm not saying only buy from companies that have got female leadership, but at least be mindful of it. I think that can shift the dial somewhat. Hopefully that's practical enough for you.
Brilliant, that's great. Thanks, Simon. Chris?
Yeah, well, I'd say, you know, I've never met a company, many company owners say we'll hire anyone with the right attitude and the right motivation. But in tech, there's a layer of skill that's needed to be able to contribute to the tech team. And so, you know, that the whole point of School of Code is we have this diverse pool of people to come and hire from, get involved. We have mentors, we have guest lectures, but also go help improve the education system as well. You know, like go and it's companies will hire people if the skills are there, and the skills just aren't being taught in the right ways. And we've seen that, right? So that's what we're set up to do. But there's many opportunities to go and improve that system. So just get involved. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I totally agree. I think the starting point, and I think you mentioned that as well, Stephanie, the starting point around education. So finishing up with you, Stephanie, if it would be great if you could share your thoughts.
2 quick tips, 60 seconds on the clock. So number one, from a management perspective, it's not always the loudest voice that wins. I have to stop the guys in conversations from interrupting me, and like I haven't finished my sentence yet, but I'm so polite. It's very, very difficult. So if the men, they do typically, and it's not their fault and there's no finger pointing, but you know, whatever, it's testosterone. But if there is someone who is kind of louder and they're celebrating their own successes a little bit more, just remember to listen to the quieter voices, to the women who stay quiet during the calls, who stay quiet during the meetings. They have something to contribute. There might be the softer skills. It's just making sure that you know how to adapt and tailor your management style, because everyone is unique and different, and we've all got our own thing to offer. And then secondly, just very practically, sign petitions. They do work. The government, obviously, if it gets enough traction, it does go to Parliament. If there are any petitions that you spot that are around the pay gap or any kind of injustices, it takes 2 seconds. Just go to change.org, and by signing a digital signature, you really can make a difference.
Brilliant. So thanks, Stephanie, thanks, Simon, and thanks, Chris. Really enjoyed chatting to you today, and I'm going to hand back to Chantel.
Thanks, Mel, and thank you everybody who took part in that panel. An awful lot covered in such a short time, so incredible. I know that there were some questions coming through, which we will be sure to get answered and post up afterwards. Claire, what did you think?
I thought there were some really interesting points made, especially about like the emotional burden that women often carry, even if they are in a partner.